All right. So welcome. I've been really looking forward to this because we are on a mission now to really try to help the general coffee business be very clear about how to basically build a roastery and keep focus on the things that really matters to you and try to avoid you to be trapped in some fruitless rabbit holes. There's been a storytelling tradition going on for the last 50 years that has really cluttered the kind of the progress for people to quickly get exactly where they want to go with their business, because people tend to get end up getting lost in details that doesn't matter. So what you see here on the first screen is really our framework to try to create a roadmap where we are going very deep with simple models for each competency pillar you need to have ticked off as a coffee roaster. And this is where control and evaluation is key. So I can see people have been writing in the Q&A. If you want to just write something, please do it in the chat. So if somebody could just write just hi in the chat, I can see that you do have access. That would be great. I'll just. All right. So the intention or the audience, the primary audience for this presentation is really roastery startups. That's our main customer segment, really. So here you can see just different types of audiences, and primarily it's startup roasters that we work with. But of course, the details that we've been going into with everything we do it makes it very relevant for bigger roasteries as well, because they have been part of this 50-year cluttering process where things have just been very, very complicated. So it's very refreshing for many professionals also to hear the story. And then I've also found that there's a lot of prosumers. I can see that the chat is disabled. So it's okay if you just write in the Q&A but the Q&A is of course for the end if we have questions. So if you have a question, please just write it down, and I'll answer all these in the end. So yeah, the chat is disabled. You write me yes. So if you write in the Q&A, please make it a question that you would like me to address in the end. So the audience, startups, professionals, but also a lot of prosumers are really going into this from a very serious perspective. And they also have for them, the roastery is also a vehicle for having fun and having an audience. It's a bit of an art. You have an audience, right? And that's just exactly the same for prosumers as it is for professionals. So prosumers can also use our frameworks to really make sure that everything they do always makes sense and they don't waste time on things that doesn't matter for what they want to do. So, and for those of you who stick to the end of this presentation, there's a special offer where basically I've taken all our digital products and made a really special offer for you that is available in the end. And this offer is basically a really easy way to get started with all the thoughts that you hear in this presentation. And next slide here, I just wanted to make sure that you know this is a worldwide event, I guess, so that you know where Coffee Mind is situated, and that is in Copenhagen, Denmark, in north of Europe. And you can see we have an academy with 6 different brands of roasters, and of course I'm sitting up here on the first floor where Ida has her sensory training and facilities and lab. And Coffee Mind is me, Morten, who is a coffee roasting expert, and then it's Ida, who is sensory scientist and has been also teaching a lot. And then, of course, my wife is making sure that everybody gets answers on time. She's doing email and also takes care of the website and courses and letters of invitation and all this you need when you travel to Copenhagen. So we specialize in coffee roasting and sensory analysis. And since 2007, we've been teaching more than 2,000 individuals in small groups, as you can see here. So it's primarily been at London School of Coffee and here in Copenhagen as far as roasting goes. And Ida has also been teaching a lot here in Copenhagen and also worldwide. We've been very involved in the SCA certification system from 2013 to 18. I was a lead creator, and then it started to slow us down a lot. So we stopped in 2018 to pursue. We still do the SCA stuff, but we are more and more working on our own because it slows us down a lot to be part of such a big organization that is just very big. And then we've been consulting more than 30 roasteries worldwide, and we've initiated more than 30 scientific research projects, of which 11 are now scientifically published. So as you can see, we are very deep in education because we've been educating a lot of people, but also been part of creating the curriculum, and then also science. And often people are either coffee specialists or scientists, and it's very rare that people are both. And this is the unique identity of Coffee Mind, that we really are bridging the gap between science and the business practices. And this is something now you will get. Basically, this presentation is a very, very short version of the podcast series I've made about coffee science. So if you want to go deep, please scan this code and subscribe to our podcast. It's free, and I think we've got, yes, you can see 12 episodes. Seven of them are going deep all the way back to Plato of what does a good theory look like and how can you make sure that your theory is good, and then theory of science, research design and statistics is something that that we've have that I'm going very deep in that podcast. So I can see somebody has got their hands up. So I'll just Clara, for example, I'll allow you to talk if you have a question. Claire, did you have a question?
I did that at the start just to make sure that you can listen, but it's all good.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, mate.
Great. Thank you. All right. All right. So while you scan the code, I'll just take a sip of my coffee. Great. Yeah, so the first slide I'll show you is a slide where I will tell you about the two only fundamental confusions that are out there that has caused all this confusion and that we see in the coffee business. And I'll give you a lot of examples, very specific examples in the education systems. And one really confusing tendency in both roasting and sensory education is focus on differences or things that are so small that they are below sensory threshold. And if you focus on a lot of small details, you tend to kind of, I think it's called penny wise and pound foolish or something like that. That sometimes if you focus on something that is too small of a difference, you might miss really big things. And there's a lot of examples, so stay tuned. But this is really a tendency that we see. So we tend to get a bit more back to the bird's eye perspective when we do things to make sure that what we do matters. And it's actually engineering thinking. You don't want to waste time on things that doesn't matter if you have a machine that needs to work in a certain way. And the next thing is the assumption of a universal yardstick for quality, which is really, this is something you can see just in the SCA scoring protocol that is used in both SCA's education system, in the Q system and the Cup of Excellence. And the idea that there's one kind of quality spectrum where you can map a coffee into is just from a sensory science perspective wrong. And I'll show you very specifically why it's wrong from a sensory science perspective. And that's one of my points really from my just a second. That's really one of my points from the podcast, that science is fundamentally a method. People often think that science is to be able to bring to name drop a lot of molecules, but it really isn't. It's a question about being able to use the right methods that gives you the right results that you are looking for. And here there's a very specific method in sensory science that's developed in the 70s by Rosemary Pangborn. That was at UC Davis in California. Actually, she had her career, and she established such a fundamental and useful distinction in product development, which is what the purpose of sensory science is all about. You can see here how there are 3 steps in this. There are 3 steps in this method, and those steps has a sequence. The first step is the discriminative test. So often, if you are product developing, you are experimenting with different parameters. If it's smoked salmon, you might have different smoking amount of smoking. So one salmon is smoked as 1 hour, another one in 4 hours, another one in 12. And so you are introducing some differences. And here it's clear, right? If you are smoking a salmon in, for example, 10 minutes and 11 minutes and 12 minutes, those differences are just too small to expect a sensory relevant difference for people to even taste the difference. And that's the whole point with when we are talking about playing with too small differences. You need differences enough so that they can be perceived simply. It's as simple as that. And this is typically you have a triangle test that you use. There are also other ways of, but it's a very simple test if you can taste the difference or not. You don't need to describe the difference, but this is a much cheaper test than the descriptive test that comes next. So it's very responsible for the sensory scientist to insist on a discriminative test. And we've tried this so often when we are consulting. For big industrial companies, the marketing department pays us to do sensory evaluation, and that's very expensive. And we insist on this discriminative test because if you invest in a descriptive test where you start to describe the differences without the differences being there, you come up with a non-conclusive descriptive analysis, and that's a very, very disappointing situation to be in, because you paid a lot and you didn't get anything for your brochure. So the discriminative test is there a perceivable difference at all? The next thing is, if there is a perceivable difference, it's worth it to describe the differences. Is it more or less acidic? Is it more or less bitter? And how much more? And this is typically on a scale. And for the smoked salmon, for example, how much more smoked does it taste, and so on. And notice the first 2 are only on intensities. You really don't deal with preferences yet. You only do experiments, so you do variations of the product to map out intensity differences. And then once you've mapped out, okay, this is more acidic, that is more bitter, then you can start addressing different customer segments with different intensities. And this is where it deviates a lot from the idea of something being the good quality. And that's also in coffee roasting. There's a lot of people who advise certain shapes of profiles, or certain length of different faces, or different ratios and stuff like that, where that's actually, where's the experiment, right? You are assuming that there's only one perfect way of doing it, which is against the idea of the whole experimental part of the sensory science, where you take the parameters in different directions, and then you will find different flavors, and you will find some customers prefer this, and somebody prefers something else. So if you basically, everything Coffee Mind does is this. So every time somebody talks about something, the first thing we are kind of critical: do we expect to be able to taste the difference at all? Right? Is the big difference big enough for us to even expect that people can pick it up? So that's really, and that's why I call it Pangborn's razor, because it shaves off all the kind of the good stories that isn't really turning into a perceivable difference in the actual product. And that's inspired by Occam's razor. That's a theory of science principles that you can hear more about in the podcast if you are interested. So this is not chemistry. This is a method with which you can test if it's even relevant to do something to a product, and you can experiment, and then you can later address the experiment results up against different customer segments. And to really hammer this in, I have a very simple thought experiment for you. So here you can see, it's very, very simple. You have a very light roast, sample A, which is Actron 100. That's a pretty light roast. And then you've got sample B, which is a very dark roast. And I hope you agree with me that the light roast has high acidity and low bitterness, and that the dark roast has high bitterness and low acidity. This is actually from the first version of the Illy book, that the first time I kind of saw this, very simply put like this. And I hope that here I'm not assuming anything that you kind of think is too weird. So it's just really simple, right? Light roast, more acidic; dark roast, more bitter. So let's say that we want to first describe this. And if you take 20 pretty random people, some of them might be specialty coffee people, some might be just normal consumers. So it's a kind of a mix of skills and preferences here. So these 20 random people, you can, if you just quickly calibrate them with citric acid in a watery dilution and caffeine in a watery dilution, you can quickly kind of make sure they understand what acidity and bitterness is. And after that short calibration, you can ask them, raise your hand if you think sample B is more bitter. And this is so obvious, right? That everybody just, sample the dark roast is more bitter. And so this is pretty simple, right? But if you ask a different question, if you ask, which one do you prefer? Raise your hand if you prefer sample A. Then you'll get a mixed result. I can see, Gilang, you raised your hand. I'll just allow you to talk. Did you have a question or a comment, Gilang?
Yes, hello. It's about the testing notes that we usually put on the packaging. That we know that there's the gap between roasteries and the consumers. That, like when we tell orange, it's orange, that consumer perception in their coffee. Thank you.
Gillian, can you go closer to the microphone? I couldn't really hear what you said. There's a lot of noise, Gillian. Could you go closer to the microphone and re-ask the question? Okay. Okay. Otherwise, if you have questions, please just add them to the Q&A, and we'll address them in the end. I'll address them in the end of the presentation, so we'll keep the momentum. Okay. So you can see here, if you ask, first we asked intensities, which one is most bitter? That's an intensity question, and everybody raised their hand for sample B, which is the dark roast. And if you ask, raise your hand if you prefer sample A, and then you'll get a mixed result. And the whole point here is that it's the same coffee and the same people, but a different type of question. And the intensity question is the descriptive analysis, so that's the middle part of Pangborn's razor. And then the preferences is the affective test, right? And here you get a mixed result. So there's a big difference between asking about intensities and preferences. And this is exactly what the confusion is about, for example, the SCA scoring form, that it's not specific with regards to who it says something about, and then you cannot really use it for product development. So if you took these 20 people and found out that there was 10 people preferring the light roast, it might be a younger segment where the preferences for sample B might be an older segment. This is just an example to show you how consumer preferences work. And it's different, and this is where you can kind of predict, because we know how from the descriptive analysis, we know how the light roast work in terms of being more acidic, and we know how the dark roast work in terms of being more bitter. Then we can also interpret what the consumers are reacting on. We can kind of interpret why these people, from a sensory perspective, prefers this, because we know it's more acidic, and we understand why these people prefer. So from the descriptive analysis, we know that it's bitterness, high bitterness and low acidity that the preferences are driven by in this segment. So it's very important to distinguish, really split up the intensity test from the preference test. And this is what we don't really see happening in the coffee business. And that's primarily because the cupping form is what people grasp as the first thing when they need to describe coffees from, and people think it's scientific just because there are some numbers on it, but it isn't. And what really pisses me and Ida off is when the cupping form goes into scientific papers. It's a complete no-go. When I'm a peer reviewer, because I've published so many papers, I'm asked to review other papers. If I see the SCA cupping form being the sensory method, I just reject the paper immediately and say that it's not a scientific method. And it's really a big problem that scientific articles are accepted using the cupping form as a sensory evaluation. The only accepted paper I would accept with the cupping form is if the scientific project is about evaluating the cupping form. Then it would be interesting, but not if it's used as a sensory method. It's not taking sensory science seriously to just use that as a default method. So also here, I want to show you, here you can see this is Ida in the lab, mapping out intensities of different samples. And then you can see here, this is what it looks like when doing consumer studies, where we are asking for preferences. So it's two very different setups, very different questions, and very different purposes. And it's so fascinating that you can actually map out intensities, because if you're mapping out intensities and using data from humans mapping out intensities, you can actually reverse the binoculars and look at the skills of the person scoring the intensities. And this is the idea behind Ida's PhD project, where basically she's developed the sensory equivalent of the hearing test that you get at the doctors. And I said she has developed, and actually she hasn't, because this is part of the tradition developed by Rosemary Pangborn 50 years ago. So this is a completely established method at the universities. There are ISO standards explaining you what to do. So it's not our invention, but we are just taking this to the community. And you can see here, for example, just like in a hearing test where you start out with a tone that is for sure below threshold, and then you increase the volume of each frequency. And when you can hear it, when the test person can hear it, they press a button, and then the next frequency, next frequency, next frequency, and then you can map out the skills of hearing for the person. And this is also possible in sensory analysis, and I'll show you exactly how it works, because this is how we got the idea to EDA's PhD, which is a PhD program in sensory learning. And we got the idea 8 years ago, and in April we'll be done next year. So it's been a lot of work, and we wouldn't have succeeded with this without our partners in South Korea, X29, and Arabian Coffee Institute in Saudi, where we've been running a lot of courses. We've also been running them in Europe, of course. So the way it works is that let's say you have 3 samples, and for, again, the sake of simplicity, we have a light, that's sample 1 here, you can see, and a medium, that's sample 2, and a dark is sample 3. It's very simple, right? The same coffee roasted to 3 different roast degree, light, medium, and dark. And in order to, because we need people to not think about samples, so we need to do whatever we can to really completely throw them off, so they don't know when they are tasting which sample. So red light, red glasses, we're doing as many things we can. And so if we just serve the 3 samples, people would kind of they would be able to guess it. So they are distributed in triplicates, or sometimes even 4 replicates. Sometimes some of the samples are 3 replicants and others are 4, to throw people off completely, so they cannot kind of try to guess what's going on. They just need to, every time they get a cup and a few descriptors, they just need to score the intensity per descriptor per cup and not think about any patterns, because this is where you start to get bad data. And of course, randomize the sequence, give them 3-digit random numbers. Let's say there are 10 panelists here, then each panelist would get their own unique sequence, random sequence through all the samples. And of course, they are scored on predefined descriptors. And each descriptor needs to have a specific reference, so that the panel can be calibrated up against that reference. And those references are typically just bought in the supermarket. You can also use Centone, L'Année du Café, and other aroma kits. But most sensory scientists would just go to the supermarket and really make sure to get the relevant references that describe the features of the coffees at hand at that particular research project. And notice here, and this is the most fascinating graph you can think of at all, if you are just a bit interested in sensory science, because this explains a lot. There's 3 very interesting things you can read from this, and I'll take you through it. So let's think about it. So see this, think about this. That's 1 copper. Think this is you, right? And you're going through a lot of cups. 3 of them are the same, but you don't know which one. You're just tasting cup per cup per cup, scoring descriptors, and you don't think about any patterns. So you will get the same cup 3 times without knowing it's the same. So the question is, how consistent are you in scoring the same cup, the same intensity for the same descriptor every time you get it without knowing that it's the same? And here I've included 3 different graphs where you can see very different skills for 3 different coppers. It's 3 different coppers copying the same sample. So look at this. You can see copper 1 is really skilled, because it seems like you can see there are three dots here, right? So this is the scoring for this copper every time the copper got the same sample and scored the same attribute on that sample. And you can see that this copper is pretty consistent. 5, 6, and 7, it was scored. And you can see that for acidity, bitterness 2 and 3, twice the copper scored 3. So you can see this copper is pretty consistent when it comes to scoring the same coffee the same when they get it without knowing that they get the same. And then you can see copper 3 is also pretty good at acidity, completely spot on bitterness, but sweetness is all over the place, right? Twice the sweetness was scored 1, and then once it was scored 8. This is weird. There's something this copper needs to train, right? Fruitiness and nuttiness is really good, and then you can see copper 3 is a bit more all over the place. Not too bad at acidity and sweetness, but bitterness really all over the place, and the chocolatey flavor is all over the place. So can you see how this is a very, very, very specific tool for giving people specific feedback? For example, copper 3, and this is the essence of Ida's PhD, that is sensory learning. And you learn fast if you train your weaknesses. So for example, copper 3 really needs to train sweetness, but it would be a waste of time to train bitterness on this person. So by getting this picture, it's just like, and this is where I think it's a bit like getting a hearing test, right? Because you actually know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And this is an amazing tool. So this is where Ida and I got the idea to her PhD by simply bringing this to the community, right? Her PhD is about measuring people's skills and then having a period. In the beginning, it was 12 weeks. Then we took it down to 8 weeks, and now you can get a 4 weeks e-learning with the essence of all the best stuff from her PhD, and I'll tell you about that later. And that's also part of the offer you'll get later to be part of this. But you can very specifically measure people's skills. And so that's one thing you can see from these slides. The next thing you can see from the slides is how the coffees are actually tasting. And that's the whole point. That's why the scientists use this method in the first place, because you can see the dotted line here, that's the panel average. And so the panel average is considered the best estimate we have of the true flavor of the coffee. So for example, if you want to quantify the difference between all these sensory attributes on a medium, light, medium, and dark roasted coffee, this is the method to use, right? So you would consider the panel average, the true mapping, or the best estimate of the true flavor differences between the light, medium, and dark. So that's why they do it. And the researchers, they also train their panel, because the more all the coppers are performing like copper number 1 here, the better the data the scientists get. So this is how panels has been trained for 50 years at universities. Why don't we do that in the coffee business? And we do, but that's only us bringing this to the community. Oh yeah, because I said there were 3 things. So one is personal performance. The other one was the true flavor of the samples. The third thing is that you can use it to calibrate panels. So because some people, you can see, for example, for nuttiness, copper 3 is spot on, right? The performance is perfect for this person for nuttiness, but it's pretty far from the panel average. So if the panel is self-consistent, but disagree a lot, then you don't get good data either. So you can also use this to calibrate a panel internally in your organization to make sure that you score more or less the same when you do this, when you cup. And this is really interesting. Ida just did this at Coffee Collective last week, and not surprisingly, they are very good at this. so that's really something that can be used in an organization. So it's 3 things you can get from a plot like this. All right, so that's a method that's available, and that's skills Ida has from her education to do that. So being a coffee roaster geek, of course, I really wanted to use that method to get quantified some of the most fundamental questions in coffee roasting. And for me, when I started coffee roasting, I was actually employed in Contra, which is a roastery that we now are renting space in here for Coffee Mind Academy. I got a job without having ever roasted a single bean, and Kurt showed me how to kind of roast a bean on the L12 Probat. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had been studying biology, so I knew a bit about thermodynamics and speed of chemical reactions and stuff like that. But really, I didn't have any theory, and I was trying to kind of get accepted by the Roasters Guild and read Roast magazine and tried to read on the internet. But there was nothing I could get my hands on where I really felt it was an simple approach to understanding what's going on. And for example, what's the fundamental relationship between color and time? For example, it might be that color is not that important, but the time you're roasting is very important, or it might be color is very important. So, and there's a lot of different claims. Everybody said something different when I asked, right? So I couldn't just so what is the truth about this? So the first thing I wanted to do when I did when I got the opportunity to have this mapped out scientifically, remember this is intensities we're talking about. The first thing I wanted to do was, from a bird's eye perspective, compare the impact of color versus the impact of time. What's most important? And if you only score intensities, you can actually get quantified those differences. So I created these six different roast profiles. So Dan, you have a question. Is it something that's related to this now, or is it something that can wait to the Q&A? Dan, I've kind of turned on your microphone.
Sorry, that was an accident.
Okay, okay, that's okay. So I created these 6 roast profiles, and the upper 3 are very different when it comes to color. Extremely light reference and a very dark roast. And the 3 lower are extremely different in different aspects of the timing. So basically, you've got total roast time and first crack. So you have time to first crack and what's called development time, which is time from first crack to end of roast. And so this scored, baked, and underdeveloped was my attempt in 2014 to create a better and more systematic framework than the SCAA roasting defect curriculum that I felt was a bit anecdotal. So I tried to kind of come up with these names for these. And in a sense, I regret that a bit, because I should just have called it overall fast, which is the scorched. The baked is just, perhaps I should have called it a long development time, because you can see the scorched, baked, and the underdeveloped, they all have the same color as the reference, as the middle upper, right? But then they are different aspects of the timing. So the baked had double development time, and the underdeveloped had double time to first crack, and the underdeveloped had then 3 minutes development time and same color as the reference. I call it the underdeveloped because expanding the time to first crack for me is making the pressure grow slower, and that leads to beans expanding less. So for me, that was kind of a physical defect or a physical difference from the reference, where the baked is more keeping the material at the same time for a longer time. That's more a chemical difference from the reference. So that was the idea, right? I wanted to explore what's the difference or what's the impact of color versus the impact of time. And then we can score the intensities, as I just told you about. So for example, you can see the dark roast is low in acidity and high in bitterness. So, but this wasn't really the main thing I wanted to know. Is just overall source of flavor variation? What are the factors causing those variations in flavor? And in the research, and which is also scientifically published, it was clear that color in itself modulates 80% of the possible kind of flavor space for a green coffee, which is not everything, but that makes color something you cannot ignore in product development and quality control, particularly not quality control. You can't choose to always roast your coffees light, but you still need to check if there's variation in the quality control on color, because if there is, for sure you're sending out flavor variations to your customers. So color is 80% and timing is only 20%, of which the time after first crack has a bigger impact than time to first crack. And this is really important because people, they do all sorts of weird thing in the beginning, up with the flame, down with the flame, up with the flame. And it's just, it probably, and that's Pangborn's razor, right? If you see too much things going on, you're thinking, this is just below sensory threshold, right? It's way in the beginning of the roast. Why would you expect it to have such a big impact? You don't, right? Because you can see the data here that it doesn't really matter. But it's a bit, that's an example of, it's just sometimes when you see people fiddling around with a roaster, it's like seeing a cat playing on the floor with nothing, right? It doesn't really affect anything. It's just a lot of, looks like you really know what you're doing, but really, it really doesn't have a big impact. So for product development and quality control, this is really important. So Muhammad, you had a question. I've made you can ask the question now. I've turned on your microphone. So if you unmute yourself. Did you have a question, Muhammad? Otherwise, I'll continue. Okay, so what about consumer perception, right? Now we've been talking about, this is just about intensities, right? No preferences. I haven't told you what tastes best here. I've just told you what parameters are primarily affecting the flavor intensities if you're changing those parameters. So what about consumers? So in this particular study, we asked consumers, and I think it was just Tina going down to the canteen at the university. So this is kind of young people. And that's very important in a consumer segment, that the data you get here says more about the consumers than it does on the about the coffees. But you can use the descriptive intensity analysis to understand what are they reacting on. And I've actually created a slide. I created this slide yesterday to really sum this up, because let's imagine you have the light, medium, and dark. The first question is, can we taste the difference? And if the light one is, let's say, 120 actron, the medium is 80, and the dark one is 40, we can taste the difference. We don't need to spend too much time wondering about that. So yes, we can taste the difference between those three roasts. The next question is, how do they taste? Not which one is best, but just how do they taste, right? And the light one will be far most acidic and not very bitter. And the medium would be a mix of both, right? And the dark will be not very acidic, but very bitter. So this is intensity. This is not about preferences. That's the descriptive test, right? We just had from the discriminative test that they do taste very different, and then the descriptive test, we ask, how are they different? And this is the big problem with the SCA scoring form, that it's hedonic data without being specific, right? You're kind of, yeah, you score a bit the intensities, right? But you don't really take it seriously. Everybody is focused on the quality number. And the problem is that the SCA scoring form actually is an effective test or a hedonic or preference test without being specific about who it's testing for. And people think it's a descriptive test, right? You think that when you've been copying and used the SCA copying form, you've been describing the coffees. No, you haven't. You have told what you think about the coffees, but you're probably not the consumer for this product anyway. So it's a bit confusing. People think it is a descriptive test. It is actually an effective test, and people don't know the difference, and they don't know what to use the number for. And it's all a big mess, if you ask me. And now, since you are here, I assume that you are asking me. So the point with this slide is that, okay, now we have described the differences. Let's see what happens if we serve these 3 coffees to 3 different customer segments. This is probably you, right? This young, fancy fella, could be any gender. And we prefer light roast, right? Medium, we can drink it if we don't have anything, but the dark one, oh, it's roasty. We definitely don't like that, right? And then you've got more like the people who perhaps drink a latte now and then, so they know what specialty coffee is, but the light it's too weird, right? So they like something with some chocolatiness. And the dark, yeah, it's too dark, but we can drink it if we don't have anything else. And then you've got a segment. My grandfather, for example, I think this is what he would have thought. The light roast is too weird, way too weird. This is not coffee, this is something else. And then the medium, still too weird, right? But it's better. And the dark, that's coffee. So the whole point is, can you see with this slide, in sensory science, you do not accept the claim that there's one universal yardstick, such as is assumed with the SCA copying form, but also often assumed in many different roasting theories, right? The curve needs to look like this and stuff like that. Well, where's the experiment in that? Where is the exploration of the different possible flavors of each coffee? That's a very important step, right? So in sensory science, and this is exactly sensory science, this is Pangborn's model explained, right? And the whole idea of one size fits all for customers. So, and a scoring of 87, for example, ooh, that's a really high quality. Yeah, but not necessarily everybody likes it. And also, how would you score a Kenyan and a Brazilian different, for example? It even those kind of differences just doesn't make sense on the scoring form, because people have different preferences, pulp natural and stuff like that. It just doesn't work to score it like that. So we used those. We've actually done 8 individual projects on sensory evaluation of roast profile modulations. And each of these projects in itself has a street price. If you're lucky, you can get a university to do it for around 10,000 euros each project. We bootstrapped it, done it internally, asked our coffee friends to be panelists and stuff like that. So we've done a lot of these projects, and we actually merged all of them into one big database. And so we've got 18,500 data points. So that's 18,500 times somebody has scored an intensity on a coffee in a scientific setup. That's a lot of data. And we explored coffees all the way from Actron around 100 to Actron 47. The fastest time to first crack was 7 minutes and 20 seconds, 21. And the longest time was 10 minutes and 7 seconds. And then the shortest development time was 1 minute and 20 and 6:45. So yeah. And not considering color, because that's a bit of an obvious point, perhaps. You can see this in our research. You can actually see how the individual descriptors are behaving depending on if you extend or shorten different phases. So you can see the slope is given by the minus or plus. If there's a minus, it means that this descriptor, for example, acidity, when it comes to extending time to first crack, you can see acidity goes down if you extend time to first crack. And if you can see, if you extend development time for acidity goes down, but much faster. So you can use this for product development, so you can get inspired on what to do if you want more or less of some flavors. This is done on Colombian washed and Ethiopian washed. So no, we don't know how this works on a natural or a Brazilian, or because we've been sticking to categories of flavor. I think it's pretty universal what we found, but of course, next step would be to explore this on different types of coffees. And here I've just illustrated for development time only, because next after color, this is the most important thing. And you can see how the different flavors are behaving visually here. It's the same data as the ones you just saw. So I set all of them to index 1. And then I've shown you here relatively how they change if you extend the development time from 1 minute and 20 to 6 minutes 45. Roasted bread goes up a lot. Acidity is by far the attribute that reacts most on extended development time. So this is useful for product development. And inspired by Pangborn's distinction, we have built a model for the competencies needed to be a skilled coffee roaster. The first skill you need is control. You need to be able to control the roaster. And people are fiddling around with the flame all the time to match curves and stuff like that. That's not control. That's like jumping into your car and asking the GPS to do the driving. I want you to have such a clear picture of the thermodynamics of your machine that roasting coffee is just like playing Angry Birds. It has to be so simple. Otherwise, you don't know what you're doing. So I've created a very simple and specific exercise for you to get to know your roaster. So it's just like learning how to drive. You'll go in a confined track that has all the extreme things so that you really can get to know the vehicle. And that's what I call the standard roast. So I've made a really simple and specific exercise for you to develop the standard roast on your machine, so that you understand the thermodynamics of the beginning, middle, and end of your specific machine. Most people don't know this because they've been fiddling around with the gas all the time. So this is what is available in my e-learning program that's called Roast Profile Design Basics. That's available for 30 euros on our website. It's almost 3 hours e-learning with quizzes and all that. And that's actually also part of the bundle that I'll offer you in the end of this, where you'll get it at a crazy discount. So this is a very specific exercise that most people have just never done, because they haven't insisted to have such a specific and simple blueprint of the speed of their machine. And this is very important. And most people, even the coffee roasting professional courses I do, this is where people get most value often, because you need to be able to have a simple model of controlling your roaster. Next step, once you have control, the next step is experimentation, right? You need to try to smoke your salmon in different kind of time periods to know where do I get the best flavor. So here you need to be able to experiment, and you also need to be able to evaluate your own experiments. And this is where people are often, I can often feel people's insecurity shows in they asking me to give them a profile. If people ask me, what's the best color for espresso? What's the best color difference between center and surface for espresso and filter? How do you roast Ethiopian naturals? All these people are asking me to give them a fish, but I want to teach people how to fish. So if you ask those kind of questions, it exposes a fundamental insecurity in sensory evaluation. And you have to develop that skills. And that's why we call this competency pillars. You need the competencies of controlling your own roaster. You need the competencies in making experiment and evaluating them yourself. Trust your own sensory skills. And that's why we focus so much on sensory learning, right? Ida is doing a PhD in sensory learning, and we are developing the first ever sensory training program that is evidence-based. We have a scientific article coming out in a few weeks documenting the efficiency and the effect of Ida's training program, so that you can actually, that you are on a learning curve. So that's very important, that you are able to make your own experiments and do your own evaluations. And once you've done that, then you can address different customer segments with your different experiments. So this is in direct opposition to telling you how the roast should look like, without even asking you, who's your customers? What do they like, right? why would you assume that there's just one size fits all for a coffee or roast profile? And this is what we put into our overall framework of coffee roasting. So this is the different competency pillars that we feel is relevant for you to create what we call the perfect coffee roastery. You need to have a specific and conscious relationship to the vehicle that you're creating, the beast that you're creating when you're creating a company. Creating a company is by far the best thing you can do if you want to know yourself better and want to do personal development, because you will face so many difficulties and crises, and then you will see how you handle that. So this is where it's very important to be specific about what is it that I want from this company. And having consulted so many people, I know that every company is a reflection of the psychology of the founder. And you need to be conscious about what is it actually I want to create. And then every year you need to ask yourself, what is frustrating me and what do I want most of? And this needs to be a continuous improvement, that you are structuring your business so that it's going to be a vehicle for personal growth and happiness. And this is where home roasters and professionals actually have something in common. Everybody wants a coffee roastery to be a vehicle of getting a better life. And I know it sounds a bit pretentious, but that's the case, right? You want something from this, you want some happiness. And this is something that's a competency you also need to have. So that's the first competency pillar. The next competency pillar is control, flavor experimentation, which is a combination of control and variation, evaluation, quality control, and then consumer preference mapping, and then a strategy. Sometimes you can use your consumer data to, these guys, I don't want to serve them. Right? So you don't have to serve people just because you know, but it's a good idea to have tools to expose preferences, because either you can choose to not serve them or you can choose to educate them. You cannot make people move far from the preferences they have. You need to move them slowly, right? Or not serve them at all. So can you see how we are inspired by sensory science here with the descriptive part? The descriptive part assumes experimentation. You need to be able to experiment with your own beans, right? And you need to make up your own mind about your experiments. And this is where people are just looking for clues on the internet, where for us, no, don't look for other people's profile. Make sure that you can do your own experiments and your own evaluations. And this is, again, in opposition to a lot of people who are telling you what to do. So the slides that I'm going to show you now will really reset your your perception of what is a big and a small difference. And it's going to be so relieving. So please stay tuned for the next couple of slides, because it's going to be such a relief to not have to worry about small details anymore. So on the Roasting Professional course, my 6 roast profiles here has been adopted. So from the research project, they are included in the curriculum now. So people are asked to be able to tell the difference between the light, scorched, baked, underdeveloped, and dark roast. So that's the 5 extremes that are different from the reference. And here I've created these roast profiles in the Ikawa, so I can easily create these and for the test at the Roasting Professional. And here I've illustrated the reference on top of each of the extreme timing differences amongst those 6 research samples that was part of the original research. You can see here the scorched was the one that was just really short overall roast. And on the Ikawa, this is really maxing out the heating element. So you can see you cannot roast faster than this. So if this is not a scorched, I don't know what scorched is. This is maxing out the heat source, and it matches the color of the reference. Then the baked, the time to first, the development time is doubled. It's going from 2.5 minutes to 5 minutes. Huge difference, right? Huge difference. People are often talking about seconds and a lot of really small differences. This is a huge expansion of the development time, double. And what I call the underdeveloped, I've also doubled time to first crack from 4 to 8 minutes. So again, huge difference. And so these are the samples I'm preparing for the people who take this roasting professional. And bear in mind, if you invest in traveling from Canada to Copenhagen or Spain to Copenhagen, or people are coming from all over the place, flight, hotels, and expensive course, you've been roasting for years, you've been tasting roast profile modulations for years, because this is pretty high level students, right? And they want to pass this test, because if they get this wrong, they might fail the whole thing and come home and not get a certificate because they failed. And I want them to pass. So I serve them these samples the day before. I serve them these samples before the test to make sure they are calibrated for these. So what kind of data do you think you get? They are asked to taste these different extremes up against the reference in 5 different triangles. So you have a triangle is per definition this discriminative test, where the student per definition knows that 2 of them are the same and 1 is different. And the 2 that are the same are always the reference, and the 1 that are different in each triangle is either the scorched or the baked or the underdeveloped or the light or the dark. So there are 2 questions. The first one, which one is the odd cup? And the next question is, and which one is it of those 5 extremes that is part of the exam? So there's first a discriminative test and then an identification test in the same triangle, right? They just pick out the odd cup, and then they identify later which one it is. So notice here, if you get a lot of triangles and you really cannot taste the difference, because you're forced to make a choice, you will get every third you will get right? So if you have a series of triangles and you get 33% correct, then you are not able to taste anything, because that's the result you get when you get your triangles correct based on coincidence. So you need to have a higher percentage than 33 to prove that you are able to even differentiate. So here you can see the results from my last 25 students. And you can see here the red column is discrimination. So here people, when the dark sample was the odd cup, everybody was able to pick it out. And almost everybody was able to also identify it as the dark one. The light roast, the scorched and the baked, was a bit surprisingly or disappointingly low, right? Wouldn't you expect people at this level to be better than this? But notice the identification. It's really, really low. Can you see how this is really alarming data, right? It's huge differences. It's people at the professional level. And if they cannot even identify if you are doubling the time to first crack, can you see how this then kind of proves these data, that what happens before first crack is not really important, because people couldn't taste a doubling of time to development, time to first crack, but they were much better able to taste differences if it was after first crack. You can see the baked one was 2.5 minutes added. So less time was added and people were more able to pick it up in the triangle, and also better able to identify it after. But if more time was added before first crack, they were less able to differentiate. You can see this is 33% people was actually not able to differentiate it and they were much less able to identify it. So hopefully you feel this is a relief, that if people are talking about small differences, it's probably not relevant. Can you see how this is the first step in Pangborg's razor? Are you able to taste the difference at all? If you're not, don't focus on it, right? It's just a good story. It's not something that from an engineering perspective, it's empty data. And now so this is, I'm using this to kind of discuss a lot of the theories that you find out there on coffee roasting, because there's a lot of focus on the rate of rise curve. And for me, the rate of rise curve is a bit of it's a superficial focus, and I'll explain that on the next slide, but it's also confusing because if you remember, these huge differences wasn't perceivable. What do you think about this curve? I know what yeah, so the rate of rise is basically the slope of the curve at different moments of the roasting. And you can see here, if you look at the bean curve, you already have the rate of rise, right? It's just the shape of the curve. So the rate of rise is nothing extra. It's just the data that you already have, because you can see the shape of the curve. So it doesn't add anything. But what it does is you can see there's much more fluctuation, because if you divide temperature and time, then the noise on the temperature signal will be expanded. So you will see where you see only a small thing going on the bean temperature itself, you'll see a huge thing on the rate of rise. But remember, what you see is more accurate in terms of magnitude of difference, right? So you can see here, if you focus it, if you look at the rate of rise curve, it's like putting a magnifying glass on the variation on the bean curve. But using a magnifying glass on something doesn't make what you're looking at more dangerous. And this is where I've had this illustration created, that just because you use a magnifying glass on a small spider, that doesn't make it more dangerous. Because here we've kind of mapped out the danger. What is the danger of these things? It's actually pretty low. So don't use a magnifying glass on something that's not too dangerous anyway, right? There's a bit of an acceleration there, and there's a deceleration, and then an acceleration again. But it's small differences. Don't sweat it. So that's one thing. And also, so that's one thing, overestimating the the effect of small differences. So that's also in the podcast. Small causes typically have small consequences. So that's one thing. And then there's also another, to insist that the rate of rise curve needs to go down in one certain way and one certain way only, is also against the whole experimental step in the product development. Why would you assume that there's one size fits all without even being specific about the customer segment? And also the development time ratio. First of all, I don't know what it even predicts. It's not specific about that. You can hear much more about that in the podcast, why it's a bad theory. It doesn't predict anything specific. And it is other than being nice. And then the kind of the effective test would ask, nice for whom? Who are we talking about? And the descriptive test would ask, but how is it different? How is it even different? And this is where many of those kind of theories, they can hide in not predicting anything in the first place. If you have a theory that doesn't really predict anything, it can never be caught being wrong. And since it's a great story, people keep telling it. But from an engineering perspective, it's not actionable. It doesn't predict anything, and then you cannot use it for anything. And this is where our framework, with first focus on color, we've shown that this makes a huge difference. So focus on color experiments. Okay, that's the color I prefer. Then focus on development time experiments, because that's the next biggest thing. Because here you are focusing on the things that matters rather than the things that doesn't matter. So it's a much simpler way of working with coffee roasting, to do experiment and kind of wait with the preferences to later, but start with the experiments. And yeah, this is a slide again talking about the rate of rise, where you have to remember that everything comes from the flame. The flame is the cause of everything. So that's the first cause of the system. That's the cause of everything, right? And then energy from the heat source is transferred to the air and to the metal. And the air and the metal then heats up the beans, right? So that's a kind of causal chain going from the heat source over the air to the beans. You can map this out on with probes, and you can then get these curves. And as I said, the rate of rise is just the shape of the curve you already see. So it's actually the fourth parameter in the causality chain model, and the third downstream dependent parameter. So it's a pretty superficial part of the roasting. And also the fluctuation makes you see ghosts that are actually not there. So it's not a really good reference point. All right, that was actually what I wanted to tell you about coffee roasting. And then I have an extra little juicy nuggets for you, those 57 who have are still here. And this is data I got last week. These particular ones are some we created a year ago, but we've some updated data with the organic acids where we've mapped out the actual thresholds by spiking different cups with the different organic acids, because this is another example of a story that has been here for 20 years. For 20 years, the idea of the relevance and even the possibility of identifying individual organic acids in coffee has been dominating. So it's been spreading to the SCA system, the Q system. So the two biggest education systems spend quite a lot of time teaching people and testing. People are failing this. And Ida, when she started in 2014 and got involved in the whole curriculum, she's coming straight from the university. It's just, this doesn't make sense. I've never heard about this. I have just graduated with a master's degree in sensory science. Why haven't I heard about individual organic acids? You learn about the basic tastes. So acidity is a basic taste. You don't have different types of acids. So she questioned this and never really got good answers from the creators group. And then 6 years ago, we decided to start looking into this empirically, and got some data that I didn't trust. I'll talk about that later. But that the pilot study we did 6 years ago kind of indicated that we were onto something that is not relevant. So just the first thing, there are two conditions that needs to be met for this to be even relevant or possible. For it to be relevant, different coffees needs to have different concentrations of the different organic acids to be even relevant to teach people, right? Because if you've just got the same acids in the same coffee, then if you have the same concentration of acids in different coffees, you cannot use it to kind of pinpoint, oh, there's a lot of phosphoric acid in this, so it's probably washed, or it's probably from Panama, or it's probably, you need to have some differences. If there's no differences, there's no information, and then you cannot use it, right? So in order to test this, on the study we just did, I wanted to take, two pulp natural Brazilians because they are known to be low in perceived acidity. And then I took two Kenyans because they are known to be high in perceived acidity. And I took Coffee Collective's Kiini, which is for me the king of acids. And then I also took the most acidic coffee that we have here available through Contra. It's as acidic, I would say, as Coffee Collective, so very close. And because I just wanted to make sure that we had some really acidic coffees. And then the pulp natural Brazilians were low acidity, and that's something you would typically add in a espresso blend if you want to keep the acidity down. And surprisingly, you can see forget about the chlorogenic and quinic acids. That's not really relevant for acidity. But if you look at the malic, phosphoric, formic, lactic, acidic, and glycolic, it seems like they are on the same line, right? So the first condition you need some differences in order for this to be relevant. And the second condition is that it has to be above sensory threshold. Because even if you had some systematic differences between Brazilian, Kenyan, or pulp natural, washed, whatever, even if you had some differences, but they were below sensory threshold, it wouldn't be relevant, because if it's below the sensory threshold, you can't taste it. So the first condition, looking for differences, you can see for malic, phosphoric, formic, lactic, glycolic, and acidic also, it seems like there's no big differences. Acidic perhaps a bit here. You can see the Bolivian is a bit above the others, but the Kenyan and Brazilian, they're on the same line, right? So there's no differences. And on the next slide, I'll show you that most sensory thresholds are between 0.2 and 0.4. So it seems like they are not different and they are below threshold. Why does the two biggest education systems, the SCA and the Q system, educate people and test people of this if they haven't even tested if it's relevant or possible? Relevant if they are different, possibles if they are way above sensory threshold. So I haven't talked about citric, and that's deliberate because notice how I took the 2 Brazilians, pulp natural, and the 2 Kenyan washed, because I wanted to have high acidity Kenyan and low acidity Brazil. So it seems like you can see the Kenyan are on the same line and the Brazilian are on the same line. So it seems like there's a relevant difference here. And it also seems like it's above sensory threshold. So let's look at citric acid. It looks like there's something interesting here. Differences that are above sensory threshold. That's interesting. But there's a big problem. As you can see here, the 2 Brazilians are the ones with the most acidity, or the highest concentration of citric acid. And the Kenyans are much lower. It's actually, the Kenyans has half the concentration, right? Or almost half. And I brought in the Kenyans because they were high in acidity, and the Brazilian because they were low in acidity. So can you see how, if it's the case that a coffee with the king of acidity, right, has half of the concentration of acids than the low acidity coffees such as Brazilian pulp natural, then it doesn't even seem like there's a relationship between the concentration of acids in coffee and the perceived acidity. And if that's the case, there's no way that these much smaller acids has an impact. And I can tell you the project we did 6 years ago, we got these results and I dismissed them. I thought the student did a label error. I think they put the Kenya label on the Brazilian and vice versa. So I dismissed them. And it was only when I talked with Samus Merke from Zurich, where he said, it's funny that you say that because I've seen something similar in some of our data. And that made me think, okay, let's do it again. So this analysis is done at a different university with different equipment, because I just wanted to be sure that we tested it completely independently, and then we got this surprising result again. Patricio, I've turned on your microphone, so if you have a question, you just raise your hand.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I would like to say, speaking about sensory profiling of the acidity, as I learned, acetic acid and phosphoric acid increase the citric sensation from the Kenyan when we are talking about sensory feeling. And the question is, could this be? Can we apply the potential of the acetic and phosphoric acid to the citric acid? I don't know how to say it in English because I am a bit blocked with this. But what I mean is, can we feel more citric acid because the acetic and the phosphoric acid is potentiating the citric? Could it be?
That they are affecting the citric in some sense?
Oh, yes, that's what I mean.
Yeah, they can. So there are two things that we are thinking. The first thing is that there must be something masking the acidity, perception of acidity in coffee in Brazilians, right? And it seems like you should look for some masking molecules more than you should look for the actual concentration of acids in coffee to explain perceived acidity. So how things are interacting, and that's probably a bit what you are thinking, right, Patricio, that we need to look at interactions rather than absolute concentrations. But you also have to agree with me that interaction is not that interesting if there doesn't seem to be a systematic difference, because they might affect each other, but if they don't really change, if you've got the same distribution in different coffees, then it's not really relevant. And also, if they are below sensory threshold, why don't we just talk about total perceived acidity rather than thinking that we can taste the phosphoric or the acetic or the malic or the lactic and so on? So it's just using Occam's razor, we need to make sure that we are not getting lost in details without really having described how the mechanisms of how they are different. And it seems like that we are on to something that has just been a good story for 20 years now, without it being described before it's being used. So the interaction that you're talking about, Patricio, is also what we're thinking about, but it's more interaction of other molecules than acids that we think is relevant for the perceived acidity. Okay. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you is data that I got last week, where we have been mapping out by spiking coffees with these different acids. And you can see only citric acid is way above. You can see the gray is the detection threshold, and the blue is the average concentration in the coffees. And you can see only citric is way above the threshold, whereas acetic is below the threshold. And phosphoric and lactic and malic is very close to the threshold. Malic and lactic is below, and phosphoric is just at the limit. And if it's just at the limit, it's not really possible to, oh, that's phosphoric, right? Because it's at the limit, so it's not really relevant. And you can see citric seems like it's different from roast. So we have different origins and different roast degrees. And you can see here, it seems like that there are systematic differences between the different roasting and origins when it comes to citric. But when it comes to acidic and phosphoric and lactic and malic, there's just no fingerprint to hang any differences up against. So that was just another example of good stories surviving, even though they are dealing with differences that are so small that they are not relevant. And you can see we've got a lot of examples of these from roasting and from sensory. So Ida and I, we are trying to build our own curriculum from scratch with none of these good stories. So we are building things from proven facts and using really simple models. We are not overcomplicating things, and I'm doing that with roasting, and Ida is doing that with sensory, and that's what her PhD is all about. And I just wanted to quickly mention a bit about that. We are running it in South Korea and with Arabian Coffee Institute. So if you want to have this hearing test, the sensory equivalent of a hearing test, you can do that in Seoul, South Korea, and Arabian Coffee Institute in Saudi, but also soon in UAE, Egypt, Jordan. Yeah, I think that's the kind of first places it will be available. And Ida's program is more like a long training period where the SCA and Q system is typically almost like showing up to a race without training. 2, 3, 4 days. There's no way, for example, if you wanted to run a marathon, you wouldn't just go to a weekend training and expect to run the marathon on Monday, right? Skills takes time. So that's why the sensory performance is kind of daily training for if you take the sensory e-learning program, it will be a 4-week thing. If you go to X29 or Arabian Coffee Institute, we have an 8-week program. But you can just get the online 4-week program if you want. And we have shown how it works. And this is the scientific article that will come out in a few weeks. And you can see we have used the article coming out. We have really mapped out the effect of this across overall skills improvement, and also looking at even how for each aroma, how much people increase their skills. And even we've shown that if you train every day, you're on a very steep learning curve. And if you don't train every day, you are on a less steep learning curve. And the interesting thing here is we have actually shown that there's quite a big improvement in sensory skills over these 4 weeks. And you could have the hypothesis that just like hearing, that you cannot train your sensory skills, it's just something chemical going on in your mouth, and that's it. So the fact that you can train it at all could also be that you would have to train daily for a year. But so the fact that we've shown that in a very short period of time, you can actually improve your senses. That's why it's a scientific article, because there's a news value in this, showing something about sensory skills flexibility. So the last slide, I just wanted to show you how we've developed a new flavor wheel. And the idea is we wanted it to be really simple to use for beginners. And we also wanted it to be anatomically correct. So you can see flavor comes from gustation or taste, the basic taste. And the rest is actually happening in your nose. So we wanted to illustrate this because the SCA flavor wheel, the basic taste are mixed with the rest of the aromas. And that's not very good for education. So we really wanted, you can see here we tried with the two rings going in to each other because it's still flavor, right? Taste and aroma is kind of the same experience. So they are different, but also they are together. We wanted to illustrate that with two rings going, but that looked is too strange. So we thought it got the idea of just putting it on the lower part. And then this is the final result where you can see the lower ring, that's the mouth. So the basic taste and mouthfeel, and the upper ring, not too complicated. So again, Occam's razor, keeping it simple. You just have categories and then some specific aromas here. So that's a very useful tool for training sensory skills, but also product development, where you are mapping out again, you trusting your own skills in mapping flavor. So this presentation, I hope that it's helped you to kind of get some skills in differentiating between just a good story and something that is really evidence-based and actionable from even from a business perspective, right? You need to deal with only differences that are big enough to be relevant. Otherwise, it's not relevant for product development and customer experimentation. So for those of you who's been sticking to the end of this, I have an offer you will not find elsewhere. So this QR code will take you to a secret landing page where this offer is presented. And it's basically all our digital products that we've put together in one big offer stack here. So you'll get the Roast Profile Design Basic, which is the control, the first pillar of the three of a skilled coffee roaster. So learning how to control your specific machine, is presented in this e-learning. It's almost 3 hours of videos and quizzes and specific exercises. And that normally sells at 30 euros only for 3 hours of video and training. That's not too bad in itself. And then Ida has done a sensory basics course. That's also, if you want a no-nonsense approach to sensory learning for you or your colleagues, this is a really valuable program. And this is almost 2 hours of theory and exercises and quizzes, also for 30 euros. So this is almost 5 hours of training from the comfort of your sofa that you'll get. And then all our scientific published papers that normally sells at the publisher's website at least 100 euros, you'll get that as well in one collected PDF. Our flavor wheel, you'll also get that we normally sell us at 5 euros. And Coffee Mind's cupping form with roast iteration PDFs. You can see a bit more about that on that particular product page. So that's basically our internal note system for product development. I've also created a framework for using different color standards from different manufacturers, how to calculate between them. And even my color palette, I've released the 3D print file, so you can print the color palette just using a 3D printer. And then our two ebooks on roasting foundation and sensory foundation. This is normally sold for 205 euros. And if you follow this QR code, you can get all of this. You can get this for only 50 euros. With 76, that's 76% discount for all our digital products. And basically, if you get this, you have instant access to all of this immediately. Then, if you are interested in Ida's e-learning program, the evidence-based her PhD sensory learning program, you can actually get that at an amazing discount here, because this sells at 250 euros on our website. But if you follow the QR code here, there's an optional upsell where you can get the e-learning, e-learning, where you will get a box shipped, and every day for 4 weeks, there's a 5 to 10 minutes training where it's either coffee or a basic taste or an aroma. We are using Centone kit. So you'll get a box filled of things to do, 5 to 10 minutes every day for 4 weeks. And this is normally sells at 250 euros on our website. And if you get this here, you'll get this for 200 euros, including all this. And if you want to do some roasting, there's another optional upsell where I have a 7-hour online virtual course where you get hands-on for 7 hours with me and a group of other international students. And you can do this either on the Bullet, the Ikawa, or the Stronghold. And this normally sells for 300 euros on our website. If you get this on this QR code on this landing page, you get this for 250 euros rather than 300, including all this. So if you consider either the e-learning program or the roasting course, I would definitely go for it here. And I'll take down this offer in 2 days. So please make sure to jump on this if you are interested. You can also just get the whole thing, in which case you get the biggest discount. But you can see all that on the landing page. That was actually the end of the presentation. So now I will go to the QA session and see. Okay. I can hear and see. There's a lot of, just a second. Okay. Factors that may, so this is from Jeffrey. Factors that may hinder pre-roasting between natural and washed processed coffees. Again, those kind of questions, factors that might hinder pre-roasting between natural and washed processed coffees. I'm not even completely sure what you ask, but it's a bit, for me again, I don't know what coffee you're using. I don't know the roaster. So for me, that's also a question that cannot really, there's a lot of questions that cannot be answered theoretically, but where you need to trust your own skills in experimenting and evaluating. So this is an example of where I don't want to give you a fish, and even I don't have a fish for this particular situation, but I have some training that would make you able to make your own experiments and your own evaluations. So I think that's the best answer I can give. Then Claire, we are startup roasters using a bullet roaster. How would you manage roast time with bean density? Again, as a general rule, high density beans can take more heat and also performs better with more heat. And if low density beans, you need to be a bit more careful. So low density beans, I typically have slightly lower flame to accept a slightly longer time to first crack. So that's the only general thing I can see, but I say. But again, Claire, do your own experiments, right? And trust your own evaluation. That's one thing, but the most important thing here is that how do you want them to taste, right? So the whole consumer part of it is a question about, you need a flavor goal. So don't ask me how to roast in general, but you could ask me how to roast to kind of get more fruitiness or stuff like that, because it needs to be connected to a purpose, and the purpose needs to be embedded in the customer preferences that you're trying to satisfy. So yeah, I've tried to kind of answer that question theoretically. Higher density can take, and also it benefits from more heat, but also be conscious about what is it that you're trying to achieve with this coffee. Because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve with it, it's difficult to evaluate and find out, when am I happy with it? Okay, and so did the copper taste 3 taste 2 different coffees. Oh, I'm not sure I understand that question. The copper 3 taste 2 different coffees. So if it's this slide, you can see they all tasted the same coffees because you have the same panel average. You have the same panel average, and the copper 3 tasted the same coffee every time. You can also see sweetness is pretty spot on, and acidity is not too bad either. So this is not because it's 2 different coffees. It's because this copper took different decisions when tasting the same coffee and scoring the same descriptor. So no, copper 3 didn't get 2 different coffees. That's the whole point of this. You can see this is even 7 different coppers on the same coffees. You can see the panel average is the same, so it's the same experiment. Okay, how? That's a question for from Yasin. How does color correlate with final temperature? And that's a brilliant question, and that's actually something that I've included in our framework that you can see here. So the way it's just like you can think about end temperature just like sunlight. So if you're outside and there's a lot of sun, let's say you get a certain amount of tan after a while, but because there's a lot of sun, it's not a very long time, right? Otherwise you become too brown. You can also go outside with less sunlight and get the same amount of tan, but then you would need to have to stay for a longer time. It's the same with coffee. If you have a high temperature, everything happens very quickly, so the color develops quickly. If you want to extend the development time but keep the color the same, you need to plan to end at a lower bean temperature, because now you have more time, and time is also adding color because it's vibrations, right? So if it's slower vibrations, you just have to wait for a longer time in order to get the same amount of vibration, which means you'll end up with the same color. And that's why you can see these lines are going through. They actually have a downward slope, which illustrates that if you want to extend the development time, you need to go down in end temperature. So that's exactly how they are related. And that's very important to know that when you are developing or playing around with development time, right? And you can also see it here. This is data from an action experiment. So these has the exact same color, and they only have the same color because extended development time ended at a lower bean temperature. Okay. Marish asked, wouldn't what you do with the flame before first crack, how the graph will behave after first crack? Yeah, sure. So for example, if you look at this, right? So the whole point, so my standard roast profile, again, I'm always aiming for simplicity. So basically you can see we've got 3 flame settings, and the first flame setting, or first flame reduction, where you go from flame setting 1 to flame setting 2, the primary purpose of this is to control time to first crack. And the reduction point here, the primary point is to control development time. So basically you can see this second reduction point is the point that has been manipulated to create differences in development time here. So what you do just before first crack, of course, influences development time. That's the whole point of it. So yes, so that's true, Maurice, and that's exactly what we want to do with that reduction point. Muhammad, sorry, my mic is not working. So how would you identify baked while you are roasting? Mostly I see it from rate of rise that is flat, more than 2 minutes. And this is, Muhammad, so for me, you know, baked, and that's also why I regret a bit to have been talking about roasting defects in my study, because if you for example see, we did these, right? So in the research project we had a really long development time, but if you look at the consumers we asked, actually they preferred the baked over the light, for example, but also they preferred the baked over the dark, underdeveloped, and scorched. So the baked was actually not considered a defect by the consumers. So my whole point is that to use this information to do experiments, because sometimes some coffees, let's say that you are developing a coffee and you're ending at a pretty light color, and with this light color you are pretty happy with the overall flavor at this color, but for the customer segment you're addressing, the acidity is a bit too aggressive. What you can do is you can extend the development time a bit to just shave a bit of the acidity. So for me, it sounds like you are doing a bit of flame fiddlement, as I would call it, during roasting. And for me, that's a no-go. I want you to be able to control your roaster as easy as playing Angry Birds. And that's the whole point with this standard roast. Once you have a very, very simple model for how to control your roast with only 3 flame settings, you're done fiddling around with the flame all the time. And then this is the best basis of being able to do experiments, because if you have only by having a simple system, you can do simple experiments where you get a predictable result, where you don't need to fiddle around with the gas flame all the time. And if you are just iteratively trying something with the development time every time without freaking out because you think you see a spider, right? Oh, something is happening, I need to do this to the flame or that to the flame so I don't, it's just the wrong focus. So for me, I wouldn't think, because it seems like you're thinking about, if the curve doesn't look in a certain way, it will be baked and then it's ruined, right? Don't think it like, don't mix the preferences into your experiments all the time. Do different variations of your experiments and then see what you think. Because it might be that a slightly longer development time doesn't make it baked, but just makes it less acidic. Baked, for me, you need 6 minutes development time before you get this bread crust flavor. So people are focusing too much. It needs to look like exactly like it, otherwise it's baked, right? And I think that's the wrong focus. And that's also why I've included this, because don't worry about the shape of the rate of rise curve. Your customers don't taste your curve, they taste the coffee. So people are over obsessing with these things. And I really encourage you to develop your own skills so you can make your own decisions, rather than having to trust that if the curve looks like this, it's baked, and then I can't. Just taste it and make you up your own mind. Okay. Soul asks, hello, why we have to turn point in ROR when the coffee do the first crack? Well, I will have to turn point here. Why we have the turning point of the ROR when it cracks? This is so again, explaining this, I'd like to go back to the first principles of physics, which is thermodynamics, of which the ideal gas law is probably the methodology to explain here. So it's something with pressurized gas all of a sudden gets a much bigger volume. And according to the ideal gas law, if a pressurized gas gets more volume, the temperature goes down. This is all the way back to the physics developed during the steam machine development period. So it might even be more like an artifact. And even if it's not an artifact, it's so small differences. So don't worry about it. Look at the curve here. Small thing, right? Just worry about the time it spends at the temperature and the color it ends at, and not these weird small things that doesn't make a difference. I think underdeveloped is when you develop, time is super short. Yeah, and that's the thing. Yeah, there are probably 100 different definitions of baked and underdeveloped. And for me, yeah, underdeveloped is just what I happen to call the one where I really extended the time to first crack a lot. It could also just be if you have a really too light roast or a green coffee that doesn't really lend itself to light roasting. Those will be grassy if you roast them too light, and that's underdeveloped. So there are different definitions of that. Then Hero. So not about the time to first crack is very long. Ref +4, like you show. I'm sorry, but I don't understand the question. So Hero, if you want to rephrase it, you can raise your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, if you're still here, Hero. You are, I can see. So I've just allowed you to talk. If you want to rephrase the question.
Yeah. Hello, Morten.
Hi.
Yeah, I was press enter just to get space to the next sentence actually. So you had answered my question. Just
Okay.
different definition. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
Great.
much. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. From Dan, given your data showing that how students struggle to tell the difference between ideal roast and your bad roast baked scorch, is the scorching of greens the most influential factor to producing, or is the sourcing of green beans the most influential factors in producing great coffee? Yes. And that's actually my whole point, that people want coffee roasting to be a dark art of magic and rainbows and mystics and fancy calculations. I'm sorry, but for me, the magic is in the greens. Because coffee roasting is not that complicated. It's just like baking bread, right? Chuck it in, heat it up. When you've got the color, it's pretty great, right? So, but it all depends on your customer segment. So just to make sure, right? So if I'm hired as a consultant for somebody who wants to make Scandinavian fancy light roasts, and I show up and they've got some low quality greens, right? Then I have an impossible task. You cannot put too much makeup on a pig and make it look like a princess, right? So that's a big problem. If you don't match the green bean purchase with the purpose of the coffees, right? That's a big problem. So you need to really have some good beans to be able to pull off a Scandinavian light roast and make it taste nice and not being grassy and all that. But then again, if you want to make a good coffee for people who add a lot of milk, don't get the most expensive cup of excellence you can get, because people can't taste the difference anyway. And then the coffee will be too expensive for them to before they want to buy it. So there's no right or wrong coffee, but there is right or wrong coffee for the right or wrong purpose, right? So it's very important that you source the coffees that matches the purpose. And this is why I always want you to be conscious about the purpose with the what we are doing. So don't ask me about how to do this or that in the roasting without also telling me what's the purpose. And this is where people, how would you roast Ethiopian natural? And I'll say, well, why did you end up with that green bean in the first place, right? You need to start with the purpose. Even if you've got friends over this Saturday, if you're a prosumer, if you've got your hipster friends over on Saturday, you will get different green beans than if your mother-in-law comes over on Sunday, right? So the purpose is given by your customer segment, even if you are a home roaster. And then you need to backtrack what green coffees to get to suit the purpose and how to roast it. And for me, coffee roasting is really not that complicated. It's just about choosing color, then development time. And if people don't add milk, you can play a bit around with time to first crack. And it is pretty simple if you just use this standard roast profile as your kind of reference point. Then it's not that difficult. So the short answer is yes, Dan. Spend time understanding what you do on the sourcing part. Gilang, how do we cope with the gap between roaster and consumers regarding the flavor tasting notes that we provide? As we know that consumers has many different references, so the flavor notes that we give can be relevant with consumer references. So that's the consumer part here. And again, this is a whole science, right? Sensory and consumer science, but it's also really simple. So let's say in this particular case, you can see here, I've got 5 different colors. Let's imagine that this is 5 different thermos, right? You just take the same coffee, roast it to 5 different roast degrees, and then you just show up where your customers are. If you, for example, want to serve offices, right? You want to help people with their office work to give them a better work day. Just show up at people who you want as customers with 5 different thermos, with 5 different roast degrees. Free coffee today, right? You can taste all 5 and walk away with the one that you prefer. Can you see how this is? It's not rocket science. And just notice which thermo is the most empty in the end of the day, and that's probably the preferences for that group. Then you can show up the next day with 5 different terroirs, right? 5 different greens, roasted at that roast degree that you found out what's the preference before, and then you might find out that they love pulp naturals. Great, then you have a roast degree, you've got a bean, and you have a product. It's pretty simple, but you have to experiment, right? You have to play around with roast degree. You have to play around with perhaps development time or different greens. So that's why there's no kind of one size fits all. It all depends. Richard, any chance of adding the espresso vision to the color correlation framework? Ooh. Good question, Richard. Yeah, that is it. I made this color correlation framework, I don't know, 8 years ago for the SCA. So good point. Good point. Muhammad, how would you profile roasting to the roasting machine? Yeah. That's a long. Well, the short answer is this: match the color, and you're already 80% done. Then relative learnings, depending on what profile a sample roast or profile roaster you have to production, you can take your relative learnings, depending on what standard roast you've developed on the pilot and the production, you can take then the relative learning of development time, and then you are 95% done. So this framework can really help you make it really simple. But otherwise, this is what we spend quite some more time on the online live roasting courses that you can purchase with the QR code. So the online live courses where you are on your own machine, where I'm there for 7 hours to help you out. That's one of the things that we can get more specific about on those courses. Yeah, Mohammed. So you, if you jump on an Ikawa course, you will get very specific and actionable ways of doing this. Saga, I'm not sure if this question is okay to ask. If first crack happens at 190 and you drop temperature is 200, which makes the delta 10 degrees, what if first crack happens at 188 to the same coffee? Will it be okay to drop at 198 considering delta 10? Oh, Saga, this is I would need to know a bit more about your machine, but yeah, because I wouldn't navigate from the first crack. I would again navigate from color and then development time. So I would primarily focus on the color here and not worry too much about this. And again, do experiments with color and development time, and then use your sensory evaluations to see if you're on track with the purpose given by your consumer segment, right? So again, I would rather teach you how to fish doing your own sensory evaluation and being skilled at exploring your own customer segment preferences than just telling you, yeah, just do that, right? Then you would miss out on the whole experimentation part. You tasting it for yourself and you exposing this in thermopods for your consumers and get all that information. So again, I would rather that you did these experiments yourself and saw what you thought and are conscious about the purpose given by the customer segment. So Fatima, I will start my own home roastery business soon, but I want to learn the craft. That's great. I took SCA Foundation and Intermediate courses. What's your advice to me? So my advice would for sure be to, even before you start your roastery, do these experiments, right? So try to be specific about who is it that you want to serve. And then I would get an Ikawa or a bullet. And then I would do these experiments even before starting the roastery to get some experience. Again, experimenting, tasting yourself, and then exposing it to customers so that you get into this iterative learning loop about who is it that you want to serve, what do they like, do experiments and see. So basically develop your concept empirically with actual roasts, with actual customers, because it might be, oh, you've been enchanted, you've been in Oslo tasting Tim Vendelbo's coffee, which by the way, I like myself a lot. But it might be you have to, there might be nobody in your area who likes it, right? So it might be that people are here and then you need to serve them not something that's too far, right? Then you need to have these stepping stone products so that you over the years can teach them but if you don't do these experiments, you don't know if your customers are here or there. And you need to create a very different strategy with your business depending on where your local customers are. So that's why I would encourage you to get a roaster, either an Ikawa, Bullet, any of these small roasters, and then even start to do this experiment, right? Experiment, taste yourself, expose to customers, learn, back experiment, evaluate yourself, and actually start flexing your muscle of those competencies so that when you start your roastery, you already know what you're doing, you know, in terms of customers, because not having customers is the source of the biggest fear and anxiety. And it's really wise to get into this relationship building process of serving and getting feedback before taking the big loan. So that's my advice. So basically, again, getting your own sensory skills, right? So that you can evaluate it yourself. And this is where EDA's, you cannot get a better sensory training than EDA's e-learning because it's based on the best stuff she's developed over the last 8 years in her PhD project, where teaching people has been part of it and measuring the skills. So I would, if I were you, I would definitely jump on the package that I offer here at in this webinar. Patricio, I've been roasting with a 5 kilo Probatone, and now my company bought a Petroncini 20, getting the same color and more or less the same development time. I got 2 different fruit flavor profile. Yeah. Petroncini and Probat are pretty different, right? The Petroncini is a convection based, and the Probatone is Probat is a more classical drum roaster. But again, knowing what I know from what happens with the development time, right? This is the data that we have here. I would just trust, if you trust your own sensory evaluation and you find one of them to be more fruity than the other, extending the development time a bit if you want to shave off some of the fruitiness is the way that you do it. So this is where you need to get to know your new roaster in terms of, do you need to modulate the profiles on the new one a bit to match the old one in terms of flavor? This is where you really need to trust your own sensory evaluation. And if you find that on the new one it's too fruity, just extending the development time a bit might get you there in matching the profiles on the new machine. Maxime, hello. I'm quite interested by the Sensory e-learning program, but unable to begin it in the following weeks. Would it be possible to order it and begin later? Are there any expiration dates? Yeah, there's fresh coffee in it. So we are making the next batch in the end of October, and it ships in the first week of November. So it says when you get the product. So if you jump on the offer today to get the sensory kit, actually you are buying the offer, but you're not ordering the kit. So you're buying the offer to get the discount, but what you will get is a store credit, and then you can order the kit using those store credits whenever you want. So you can wait 3-4 months, but you got the discount today, and then you got the store credit to order the kit anytime you want. So you can jump on the discount today, and then you can choose to order it in the end of October, or you can choose it the November or December. It's completely up to you, but you can secure your discount today by purchasing it today. And oh, by the way, and it also says in the landing page, you need to add shipping to the cost, and it depends on where you are in the world, and that's why also the store credit you get once you purchase the offer bundle. The store credit makes you not have to pay for the kit when you order the kit, but you will pay for shipping when you order the kit, because it depends on where you are located in the world. But we send worldwide. Yeah, how the color related to final temperature, I already answered that. Taufen, hi, what is your medium roast action used in this presentation? And is it ground action? Oh yeah, that's a good question. It's ground, yes, because ground bean tells you something about the average. So I want to know how much energy is absorbed by the beans. So for me, the color is a reflection of how much energy is absorbed. Totally energy is absorbed in the beans, and ground is best. And it needs to be as fine as possible, without clumping when you spread it out, depending on what color meter you use, because it needs to be as fine as possible, because then you don't get a scattering effect where the light rays are scattered, because that will give you an artificial dark reading because it's scattered. Yeah. What is your medium roast? And again, medium, it's a consumer concept. So you would have to ask people what they think is medium, the consumers but the one I used in the presentation, that's actually visible here, because the standard roast is roasted to what I call the midway point. And you can actually see that on this presentation, on this slide. You can see here the midway point is the bean temperature point midway, the temperature of first crack and second crack. This is not a preference. You can see we are not in the preference part. We're not in the consumer part. This is just a very technical point that is easy to point out. It's not very dark, because then it would be close to second crack. It's not very light, because then it would be close to first crack. So in a sense, that's a technical medium. But my hipster friends think that, oh, this is not medium. That's very dark. It's roasty. And when I give it to my neighbors, they think it's too acidic, right? So medium is a consumer concept. But technically, I think it's a pretty medium roast, because it's not very close to neither first or second crack, which to me is either dark or light. So it's the midway point. It's the temperature point midway, the bean temperature of first crack and bean temperature of second crack. Shannon, if the roast is going faster than normal, is the development time more important, or the final drop temp? Meaning, should I drop the same temp as before, even the development time? That's a good question. Or should I let it go? And I would say the color. You ask. Remember, color is 80% of making your coffee taste the same. So if you jump on even the basic offer that you get, you can get here. You get my color plate. I don't have one up here, but this is where you have your reference color in the middle of the plate, and then you take out beans while roasting so that they will be close to the reference without mixing. So that's how it's designed, this plate. So you will get the 3D print file, so you can print it on a 3D printer, and that's the best way of keeping an eye on the reference that you're roasting. And then I would take it out when it hit the color of the reference that I'm trying to match, and then I would focus on that rather than the development time or temperature, because I know that the color is more important than the development time. So whatever temperature and time where I can visually see that I match the color, that would be the way that I save the roast. Patricio, one on Propertona, I got more citric fruit flavor, but on Petruccini is more mature fruit. Yeah. Are you sure? Right? This is where, did you do triangulation? So this is where being kind of devil's advocate, because people often tell me what they've tasted, but did you even check with triangles that you could taste the difference? Because sometimes, if you do an experiment and you think something and you might be biased, or what, I don't know what your evaluation process was, but I would set up a lot of triangles to test if I could discriminate the differences. Okay. Ruben, thank you, Morten, for everything. I am a production manager of a roastery, not a roaster, and a very novice copper. How can I help shape our culture to where we all focus on the essentials of flavor rather than get into the useless rabbit holes? Well, start using Pangbor's razor, right? If people claim something, put up a triangulation and see if they can even taste the difference. Or if they've made an experiment, if people, oh, I did airflow experiments, I did drum speed experiments, I did the soak, turned down the flame up again in the beginning, and I did different rate of rise experiments. Check that in experiments like that people made sure all the samples were roasted to the same color. Because there's a lot of people doing all sorts of experiments. Don't read color, because that's not very sexy, and everything is in the curve, right? Why should we measure the color? Well, if you don't measure the color, if you do a drum speed experiment, right, and then you cup it, and you think, oh, that's my preference. If you didn't make sure that all your roast ended at the same color, you will for sure have different colors on the table when you did the drum speed experiment. But what you taste and what you prefer is actually the color that you prefer and not the drum speed. And this is the everything else equal principle in research design. You need to keep everything else equal. Otherwise, you don't know what is the actual factors that is shifting the flavor. So I think just listen to my podcast and take notes. That will kind of get you on the right direction. You can also, if you get the offer here, of course, the 50 euro, where you get more than 5 hours of Ida and me brainwashing you, you'll recognize a lot of things, but there will also be practical exercises in both the roasting and the sensory that will kind of, if it's in our e-learning program, it's because it's not the rabbit holes or the things that doesn't matter. So if you want a free brainwash, it's the podcast. And if you want some more practical things with quizzes, it's the e-learning that we've done. That's kind of a pretty affordable way to get started, right? And get familiar with the basic concepts that will keep you out of the rabbit holes. Claire, thank you. Just purchased your perfect roast package and look forward to live training. Aaron from Bristol Live. Great. Thanks a lot. Clear. Lucas, ooh, hey, what would you say is the main cause of inconsistent color? Lots of Quakers and bitters within a single batch, assuming the beans are of high quality. What would you say is the main cause of inconsistent color? That's interesting. Well, size differences, density differences, and humidity differences, that's the causes of inconsistency between beans. But remember, sometimes you can get an Ethiopian handful of greens and they just look like, what's this? It's all over the place, right? But it tastes amazing. So this is where it's all in the flavor, right? Yeah, you can see things on the green, but you have to taste it before you can really. So there's a lot of things that's not necessarily a problem, particularly depending on what's the purpose of the coffees, right? Sometimes if a coffee have a lot of inconsistency, it gives a lot of complexity, right? So it's not necessarily bad. Could be bad, but it's not necessarily bad. It depends on what flavor are you looking for, and how is the inconsistencies in this particular coffee. Richard, assuming during your standard roast you are leaving air and drum at the same throughout. Assuming during your standard roast you are leaving air and drum at the same throughout. Yes, so F3, D9 on the bullet. But during your experimentations, do you vary these other two as well as the two flame changes? In the standard roast, I would not change neither airflow nor drum speed, because as you remember from this slide, I consider the primary parameter of modulation to be the flame, because basically what you do when you roast coffee, you heat up greens, right? So the flame is the most important parameter to understand in your system. And that's why I would keep everything else the same to get the blueprint of the heat source. Once I have that, then I can do different things during the roast, but you would be surprised how little you have to play around with all that. So I definitely see the flame as the main thing. But during this experimentation phase, so yes, during the development of the standard roast, I would not fiddle around with air speed or drum speed during roasting, because I would focus on the flame. And during the flavor experimentation, there are no rules. You can do whatever you want. And you would be surprised how often you can just stick to this simple 3-step setting. I hope that answers the question. So basically you can play around, but you'll be surprised how often you don't have to. Guy, I did not understand the option to buy the sensory kit, and I did not see it in the QR. Okay, so Guy, if you go to the link, right, then if you go to the bottom, you'll be taken to another page, and on that other page you have all the buying options. You can either only get the basic offer, the 50 euro basic offer, or you can choose to get the basic offer plus sensory, or the basic offer plus roasting, or the basic offer plus roasting and sensory. But you need to go to the next page. So the first page just shows you the basic offer, and then you press the bottom the button below, and then you get to the next page where you can actually choose the different combinations. Belaichi, how many steps for roasting Probat Neptune 500 Robusta coffee? I would, it depends. So again, the standard roast, you can use that, just use 3 steps, but you can also do experiments. But if you're in doubt, just use this standard roast, and you will definitely not roast too fast or too slow, and see what happens. If you roast Robusta, you need to be ready for much higher temperatures than Arabica in order to get a useful color. Is it safe to say that the charge temp and turning point are not as important for different density or different moisture content if the percentage is so low before first crack? The charge temp and turning point. Charge temp and turning point. Yeah, the charge temp. Yeah, in the standard roast development, the charge temp and the initial flame setting kind of goes a bit hand in hand, because that's how much energy you have available in the beginning. So that's part of that exercise to make that decision. Turning point for me is an artifact. I don't pay too much attention because it's how thick is the probe, where is it placed. So I would rather just focus on time to first crack, right? And get that right. And that's exactly the point of the e-learning roast profile design basics, to help you make all these decisions. So you have what I call the standard roast. So I think that standard roast development is exactly a practical exercise to get to have these decisions done. So I would definitely recommend you to go through that e-learning. Shannon, free development time or whatever. This question is for a known recipe that has gone off the rails. Environmental factors seem to affect. Did you ask something before? Yeah, if the roast goes faster than normal, meaning it would be, or should I let go on 1.5 development time and then you follow up? Yeah, but my answer is still the same. Focus on color, and then later, and this is my point also on this slide, you can see. So to save the roast, I would focus on color, because I know color is, as I said, 80% of the possible causes, right? But once you've tried to save it by matching the color, there might still be differences because the development time is different. This is why you need to be very conscious about who is it which customer segment is this product going to, because you can see here the quality control. If this is your fruity coffee to your hipster audience, they might pick up that something happened, right? But if it's to the segment that adds a lot of milk anyway, nobody will notice the difference. So when you have your QC protocol and do the triangles, it might be that you are able to pick up the differences between the roast you saved and what you did normally. So the best case would be that you even you can't taste the difference, right, in triangles, and then you can just sell the coffee with no worries. It might be that you can pick up the difference, but and you can see in the discriminative test, and then the next step is to describe how big do you think the difference is, and this is where you need to trust your own sensory skills, right? Because, well, it's there, but it's not. They will not notice, right? And that depends on the expected sensory sensitivity of your audience. So you need to describe for yourself the difference that is introduced by the deviation of protocol, and then evaluate if that difference that you are mapping up out in the lab is relevant for the customer segment that the product is going to. And it could be that, yes, I can taste a small difference, but I'm sure they can't. Or it could be, yes, I can taste a difference, and these are really picky customers. I better not send it. But can you see how it's a combination of you trusting your own evaluation, and you being specific about what quality ranges do I have here, or the sensitivity thresholds for my different customer segments. Hope it made sense. Ask, how can we measure color? Which device do you recommend? Ooh, this is, Yeah, so there's a lot of different, because I am a bit nervous, because then I'm told that I prefer something. So for example, the Espresso Vision that was just mentioned is inexpensive. So if you Google Espresso Vision color reader, you'll find it. Then there's also My Tonino. I don't want to put links here because I'm not affiliated with any of these, but I'll just brainstorm now and you can Google. So Espresso Vision, My Tonino, great, affordable piece of equipment. There is Dipper. So if you Google Dipper and color reader, you will find it. And then there's Javalytics, handheld Javalytic bench model. There is Lightel's CM100 Plus. I've got 2 of these downstairs. There is Color Track. So yeah, so if you Google any of these, you will see what they cost, and you will see which budget you have for that. Are you coming to KSA anytime soon for roasting course? Actually, I am. I woke up in Dubai this morning, and I did a presentation at Cypher yesterday, and they really want to do some roasting training with me in Dubai at Cypher. So yeah, hopefully might even do it in January at the World of Coffee in Dubai. So keep an eye on Cypher's homepage. But I also will come to Saudi, hopefully, also in the beginning of the year, where we'll do a lot of different things, and amongst others, roasting, intermediate and professional with Arabian Coffee Institute. So I'll be in the area for sure. What do you think about knowing the coffee best time to taste based on density? I don't know anything about this, and also I wouldn't go into all these things. I would, who do you want to serve? Try out different green coffees and different experiments, taste it yourself, serve it, right? That you don't ask all these theoretical questions. You need to have empirical answers, and you need to be able to do your own experiments, evaluate them, serve them, get feedback, go back, different greens, different experiments, taste them. So that's really, those are the skills you need to have, right? You need to do your own experiments. And so this is where we really want to give you the tools to get your own skills, to answer your own questions, right? We want to teach you to fish. We don't want to give you a fish. Richard, the shipping costs on the digital, no shipping costs on the digital content. All the digital, if you get just the basic offer, the second you've paid, it's available for download. Even in the email you get, you can just click and you can get all the PDFs and the 3D print and everything. So no shipping costs on digital content. Yasin, how do we measure color? Which device? I've just mentioned, answered that already. Is coffee roasted for 18 minutes and dropped at 214 baked by definition? Or is not my roasting just something I saw in another roast? Again, 18 minutes sounds like a long roast. I would definitely, and this is actually the whole point of the roast profile design basics. You need to test. It's not just like, it's just like going on the racetrack, right? If you are a race driver and you really step on it, and the car doesn't accelerate fast, you will ask them to fix it so that the machine is faster than that, right? So even a 60 kilo batch, I would insist to get the manufacturer make the machine able to give you first crack around 8 minutes at full flame. That's exactly the stepwise process in the roast profile design basics. So Guy, you need to take the roast profile design basics, do the experiments and see if you need to call your gas guy, because it's time, or girl, or because it seems like if your roasts are 18 minutes long, you don't have enough power. So you need to do the roast profile design basics and use the data you get from that to call your gas engineer. Is weight loss good to predict roasting repeatedly? No, weight loss is, no, I would read color. Brian, is the sensory comes with a basic kit or separate and need? Yeah, the sensory kit comes with the basis offer, if that's your question, Brian. Yeah, so, or is it the basic taste you mean? But yeah, the basic tastes are in the kit, but the basic offer is also implied if you get the sensory kit. All right. 2.5 hours. I've had a lot of fun, and thank you for staying this long, you 30 people. I really love this. I hope that you got what you wanted. Just to make sure that if you didn't scan it, I just make sure that you have the page here. So basically, the whole point is get your skills in experimentations, evaluation, and consumer experimentation as well. If you get those skills, you don't need to ask about anybody's opinion or permission. Then you have your own closed loop of decisions. And that's by far the best point of departure of feeling secure and competent in what you're doing. And that's why we are focusing so much on your skills rather than the artifacts of curves and fancy sensory descriptors, mango peel, plum pudding. You need to have a very strong foundation. And if you have a very strong foundation of competences, then you can make your own decisions. And that's really where we want to take you. We want you to feel that you're competent in making your own decisions. So that's how all our courses are structured, is to make you confident and competent. And this is where science is perfect, because science tries to make the simplest possible relevant models for making differences that are relevant and getting data on everything you're doing. So thank you so much for hanging out here. And Ida and I will do a lot more online stuff. So please consider if you just stay in our kind of loop in terms of our Instagram, you will be announced every time we do live stuff like this. So I need to get my son at ping pong now, so I have to leave. So have a great day or night, depending on where you are in the world. And hopefully I'll see you soon, also in the real world. Have a great day or night. Bye.